What you're seeing now is just an old man speaking to a camera. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Time is irrelevant to me. I have watched kingdoms rise and fall, wars begin, and empires crumble. You read history in books. I lived it. Now, let me take you back 930 years ago, to France. Claremont, France, 1095. The story of Jerusalem did not begin in Jerusalem. It began in a crowd. In the winter of 1095, I was standing at Claremont in the heart of France, with mud on my boots and hunger in my stomach. Around me were peasants, knights, monks, widows, merchants, boys too young to understand war, and old men who understood it too well. They had come to hear His Holiness, Pope Urban II. No one in that crowd could see the 200 years war that would outlive all of them. They could only see the Holy Man. They could only hear Jerusalem. Pope Urban did not create that moment from nothing. Long before his voice carried over the crowd at Claremont, the Eastern Mediterranean had been breaking under pressure. In 1071, the Byzantine Empire suffered a terrible defeat at Manzikert. The Seljuk Turks captured Emperor Romanos IV, and Byzantine control in Anatolia began to unravel. Anatolia had been the empire's shield and its recruiting ground. Losing it meant more than losing land. It meant losing security, soldiers, taxes, and confidence. By the time Alexios I Komnenos became emperor, he ruled an empire that still looked magnificent from a distance, but felt fragile from inside its walls. Constantinople was rich, sophisticated, crowded with churches, markets, officials, foreign traders, and old Roman pride. Yet beyond the capital, Byzantine power had shrunk. Alexios needed help. What he wanted was controlled military support from the West. Knights, perhaps. Mercenaries. Men who could be paid, directed, and used to recover territory. What arrived was something much harder to control. At Claremont, Pope Urban spoke to a world already full of violence, anxiety, and religious hunger. We do not have his exact words. Later writers shaped his speech for their own purposes. But the result is clear. Pope Urban called on Christians in the West to go east, aid fellow Christians, and fight for access to the holy places. To many who heard it, or heard it repeated, the message felt larger than politics. A violent age had been given a sacred road. Knights who had spent their lives fighting neighbors were told their swords could serve God. Poor men and women heard that Jerusalem waited at the end of the journey. Preachers carried the message across towns and villages. Families sold property. Lords gathered retinues. People sewed crosses onto their clothing. I first joined them as a servant, carrying bundles for men who had never traveled beyond their own region. Many did not know how far Jerusalem was. Some thought the journey would take weeks. Some brought children. Some brought old parents. Some carried nothing except faith and hunger. The People's Crusade moved first, led in part by Peter the Hermit. It was a wave of religious excitement, poverty, confusion, and desperation. Along the Rhine, some Crusaders turned their violence against Jewish communities, committing massacres that revealed how quickly sacred language could become permission for murder. They reached Byzantine territory in disorder. Alexios watched with alarm. These were not the disciplined soldiers he had requested. Many were starving, many were armed poorly. Many could not be controlled. When they crossed into Anatolia, the Seljuks destroyed much of the movement near Sivto in 1096. The road to Jerusalem had barely begun, and already it was lined with bodies. Then came the princes, Bohemond of Taranto, Raymond of Toulouse, Godfrey of Bouillon, Baldwin of Boulogne, Robert of Normandy, men of rank, ambition, rivalry, and real military ability. They came with knights, infantry, horses, priests, servants, and camp followers. They swore oaths to Alexios, though many did so uneasily. Byzantines and Western Crusaders needed each other, but trust was thin from the beginning. In 1097, the Crusaders helped take Nicaea. Then they fought through Anatolia, winning at Dorylaeum against Seljuk forces. Victory kept the movement alive, but the land punished them. Heat killed horses. Food disappeared. Water became more valuable than silver. Men who had imagined glory found themselves chewing leather and marching under a sun that gave no mercy. I remember Anatolia by the sound of animals dying. Not battle horns, not prayers. Hooves stumbling, ropes snapping, men cursing as horses collapsed in the dust. The Crusade survived because it kept moving, but each mile stripped away another illusion. Then came Antioch. Antioch was one of the great cities of the Eastern Mediterranean, ancient, fortified, and strategically vital. Its walls stretched over hills and ravines. To take it, the Crusaders would need patience, supplies, unity, and luck. They had very little of any of those things. The siege began in October 1097 and dragged through winter into the next year. Hunger entered the camp quietly at first. Then it became the main enemy. Men slaughtered animals they needed for war. The poor searched through refuse. Disease moved between tents. Desertion increased. The Crusader leaders argued. Byzantine support became a source of suspicion. Local alliances shifted. Rumors carried more power than commands. Inside the city, the defenders endured their own fear and shortages. Outside, the Crusaders waited in mud, cold, and hunger, wondering whether the holy journey had led them to a grave. In June 1098, through the help of an Armenian god named Firuz, Bohemond's men gained entry into the city. Antioch fell to the Crusaders. Then the trap closed. A large Muslim relief army under Kerboga of Mosul arrived soon after. The Crusaders, who had just taken the city, were now trapped inside it. Starvation returned. Despair deepened. Some fled. Some claimed visions. The discovery of what was said to be the Holy Lance gave many Crusaders renewed confidence, though historians still debate how the episode should be understood. What matters is not whether every man believed it in the same way. What matters is that belief gave a starving army the courage to march out. Against expectation, the Crusaders defeated Kerboga's forces. Antioch had nearly destroyed them. Instead, it hardened them. After that, Jerusalem was no longer an idea in sermons. It was the last promise left standing after years of hunger. The Crusaders reached the city in June 1099. I remember the first sight of it. Some men fell to their knees, some wept, some raised their hand. Others stood in silence, too exhausted even for joy. Jerusalem lay under Fatimid control. Its walls were strong. The Crusaders lacked water and proper siege equipment. The surrounding countryside could not easily feed them. Yet the emotional force of the moment was enormous. These men had crossed Europe, Anatolia, and Syria. They had survived battles, plague, hunger, and fear. Now the city was in front of them. They built siege towers. They stripped timber from distant places. They prayed, fasted, argued, prepared. On July 15, 1099, the Crusaders breached Jerusalem's defenses. What followed was a massacre. Medieval sources describe the killing in different ways, and some exaggerate numbers or use religious language shaped by their own purposes. But the central fact is not in doubt. Many Muslim and Jewish inhabitants were killed. The city was taken with extreme violence. The Crusaders had imagined Jerusalem as the end of suffering. For those trapped inside, it became the beginning of terror. I entered after the walls were breached. The streets were narrow. Smoke hung in the air. Doors had been smashed open. Men shouted prayers with blood on their sleeves. In places that had been homes, people searched for survivors, valuables, water, anything. The city had been promised as a holy reward. When the Crusaders took it, holiness did not stop the killing. That is when I understood something. I would spend the next 200 years trying not to forget. Faith can carry people across the world. It can also teach them not to see the person in front of them. Taking Jerusalem created a new problem. Now it had to be held. The Crusaders established states across the Levant. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli. They were small Latin Christian states in a region of older cities, older communities, and far more complicated loyalties than many newcomers understood. The first rulers faced a hard truth. Conquest was easier than government. Baldwin I became king of Jerusalem in 1100. He and those who followed him had to secure roads, ports, castles, taxes, alliances, and pilgrim routes. The coast mattered because ships from the west brought people, money, supplies, and news. Cities like Acre, Tyre, Jaffa, and other coastal strongholds became lifelines. The Crusader states were never purely European islands dropped into the east. They depended on local Christians, Muslims, Jews, Syriac communities, Armenians, Greeks, merchants, translators, farmers, sailors, and officials. Markets reopened. Treaties were made. Raids continued. Ransoms were negotiated. People learned languages out of necessity, not harmony. I spent those years as a caravan worker, then a dockhand, then a scribe for a merchant who cared more about pepper and wool than theology. I saw pilgrims arrive barefoot and leave disappointed that Jerusalem smelled like any other crowded city. I saw knights pray at holy sites and then haggle over property. I saw Muslim farmers pay taxes to Latin lords and keep working the same soil their fathers had worked. Life returned, but never safely. Castles rose across the landscape. Some guarded passes, some watched roads, some protected frontiers that always seemed to move. The military orders emerged in this world. The Templars, first connected to protecting pilgrims, and the Hospitallers, rooted in care for the sick and poor before becoming a military power as well. Over time, these orders became wealthy, disciplined, and deeply involved in war. For a generation, the Crusader states survived partly because their enemies were divided. Muslim rulers in the region had their own rivalries. Damascus, Aleppo, Mosul, Cairo, and other centers of power did not act as one body. Local politics mattered. Alliances could cross religious lines when survival or advantage required it. This is one of the first truths lost when people tell the story too simply. Christians fought Christians. Muslims fought Muslims. Christians and Muslims made treaties with each other when it suited them. Jerusalem was sacred, but politics never stopped being politics. Still, the Latin states remained vulnerable. They were stretched thin. They relied on reinforcements that came irregularly from the West. Their leaders competed. Their survival required a divided region around them. That division did not last. In 1144, Zengi captured Edessa. The shock traveled west like a bell struck in a stone tower. Edessa was the first Crusader state established. Its fall proved that the Latin presence in the east could be reversed. The idea of Crusader permanence cracked. Zengi was not simply a religious warrior. He was also a ruler building power through military force, political opportunity, and control of cities. After his death, his son Nur ad-Din continued the work with greater discipline and vision. Nur ad-Din strengthened resistance to the Crusader states and tied political unity to religious legitimacy. The West answered Edessa's fall with the Second Crusade. It failed. Kings came east, including Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany. The campaign struggled across Anatolia and ended in humiliation before Damascus in 1148. The failure damaged confidence. It also showed that crusading enthusiasm could not replace strategy. Meanwhile, the real center of the struggle began shifting toward Egypt. Egypt was rich. Egypt controlled resources. Egypt could change the balance of the region. Both Crusader leaders and Muslim rulers understood this. Into that contest came a Kurdish commander named Salah al-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known in the West as Saladin. Saladin did not begin as a legend. He rose through service, politics, war, and patience. He became vizier in Egypt, then ruler. After Nur ad-Din's death, Saladin spent years consolidating power, not only against Crusaders but also among Muslim rivals. His achievement was not that he simply wanted Jerusalem. Many wanted Jerusalem. His achievement was building the power that made its recovery possible. By the 1180s, the Crusader states were surrounded by a far more unified force than before. Inside the Kingdom of Jerusalem, leadership was strained. King Baldwin IV, who suffered from leprosy, had held the kingdom together with remarkable determination. But succession disputes and factional rivalries weakened the state after him. Guy of Lusignan became king through his marriage to Sibylla. Powerful nobles disagreed over policy. Some wanted caution, others pushed confrontation. Among the most dangerous figures was Raynald of Chatillon. Raynald was bold, aggressive, and reckless. His raids, including attacks connected to Muslim caravans and threats toward the Red Sea routes, intensified conflict and gave Saladin both political and moral justification to act. In 1187, the crisis came. Saladin invaded. The Crusader army gathered. Against cautious advice, Guy led his forces away from water toward Tiberias. Jerusalem had been won by siege. It would be lost by thirst. The road to Hattin was dry, hot, and punishing. The Crusader army moved under pressure, harassed by Saladin's forces. Water was scarce. Smoke from fires made the air worse. Men marched in armor beneath a July sun. Horses weakened. The army tried to reach the springs near Hattin, but Saladin's forces controlled the ground. I was there as a water carrier attached to men who no longer had water to carry. By night, thirst had become panic. By morning, it was defeat. On July 4, 1187, near the horns of Hattin, Saladin destroyed the main Crusader field army. The relic of the True Cross, carried into battle as a sacred symbol, was captured. King Guy was taken prisoner. Many knights were killed or captured. Members of the military orders faced execution. Reynald of Chatillon was killed by Saladin himself, according to many accounts, after years of provocation. The military shield of the Kingdom of Jerusalem had been broken in a single disaster. Cities and castles began to fall. Without the field army, the kingdom could not defend itself properly. Saladin moved with speed and purpose. Then he came to Jerusalem. The city was defended by Balian of Ibelin, who negotiated under desperate conditions. The population was swollen with refugees. People remembered 1099. They knew what had happened when the Crusaders took the city. Many feared revenge. But Saladin did not repeat the massacre of 1099. That does not mean the fall was painless. Ransoms had to be paid. Those who could not pay faced enslavement or dependence on mercy and charity. Families were separated. Possessions were lost. Fear filled the streets. Still, the city changed hands with far less slaughter than before. In October 1187, Jerusalem returned to Muslim rule. The news struck Europe with force. The city that had justified generations of crusading was gone. Churches mourned. Preachers called again. Kings prepared to move. I walked through Jerusalem after Saladin's victory and saw men washing stone floors, repairing doors, counting captives, searching for relatives. Some people thanked God. Some cursed God. Some were too tired to speak. The city did not look like a symbol then. It looked like a place where everyone had lost someone. Jerusalem had fallen, but the idea of Jerusalem was still powerful enough to pull kings across the sea. The Third Crusade began because Europe could not accept the loss. 3 rulers took the cross: Frederick Barbarossa, the old emperor of the Germans, Philip II of France, and Richard I of England, later called the Lionheart. Frederick never reached the Holy Land. In 1190, he drowned in Anatolia, and much of his army broke apart. His death was a reminder that even the greatest plans could vanish in a river before the real war began. The center of the crusade became Acre. Acre was not Jerusalem, but it mattered. It was a port, a gate, a lifeline. Whoever controlled Acre controlled access to the coast. The siege became long, brutal, and crowded with armies from across the Mediterranean. I worked there as a dock laborer, and sometimes as a stretcher bearer. The smell of Acre was salt, sewage, sweat, sickness, and wet rope. Ships arrived heavy with men and supplies. Ships left with wounded, letters, and rumors. The siege dragged on from 1189 to 1191. Disease killed where swords did not. Men died in trenches, in tents, at the walls, and in the water. The besiegers became nearly as trapped as the besieged. When Richard arrived, he brought energy, money, and military skill. Acre surrendered in 1191. Soon after, Richard ordered the execution of thousands of Muslim prisoners after negotiations over ransom and terms broke down. It was a hard act, and it belongs in the story beside his courage and victories. Richard was a brilliant commander. At Asuf, he defeated Saladin's forces and restored Crusader morale. He helped secure parts of the coast. His reputation grew with every movement, but Jerusalem remained beyond him. The problem was not simply taking the city. The problem was holding it after taking it. Richard knew that if he marched inland and captured Jerusalem without controlling the surrounding region, the city could become a trap. Armies could starve in holy places as easily as anywhere else. Richard and Saladin never met face to face, as later romance liked to imagine, but they negotiated through envoys. Both men understood war, reputation, exhaustion, and limits. In 1192, the Treaty of Jaffa allowed Christian pilgrims access to Jerusalem, while the city remained under Muslim control. The Third Crusade saved a Crusader presence on the coast. It did not recover the city. I watched men return west with stories that made the campaign sound cleaner than it had been. Kings like clean stories. Veterans rarely have them. Jerusalem stayed where it was, visible in prayer, unreachable in power. After the Third Crusade, the dream did not die. It changed shape. Some leaders concluded that Jerusalem could not be held unless Egypt was taken first. Egypt had wealth, grain, and strategic depth. Control Egypt, and perhaps Jerusalem could be controlled again. Others saw crusading as a tool for politics closer to home. That corruption became impossible to ignore in 1204. The Fourth Crusade set out with Jerusalem as its declared goal. It ended by attacking Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the East. Debt, Venetian interests, Byzantine politics, ambition, and opportunism pulled the crusade away from its purpose. The result was catastrophic. Crusaders stormed Constantinople, looted churches, seized treasures, and shattered Byzantine power. The city that had once asked the West for help was now broken by men wearing crosses. I was in Constantinople then, working near the docks, old enough in appearance to be ignored. I saw Latin soldiers carry sacred vessels through streets they did not understand. I saw Greeks watch in silence as their world was humiliated. The sack did not end Byzantium immediately, but it wounded it deeply, and it revealed something the crusading movement could no longer hide. A holy language could be bent toward money, revenge, and empire. Later crusades tried again. The Fifth Crusade attacked Egypt and failed after initial success at Damietta. Then came one of the strangest recoveries of Jerusalem. In 1229, Emperor Frederick II negotiated with the Ayyubid Sultan al-Kamil. Without a major battle, Frederick gained control over Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth for a time. Muslim control over certain holy sites remained part of the arrangement. The agreement angered many. Frederick was under excommunication. Some Christians saw diplomacy as shameful. Some Muslims saw the concession as dangerous. Jerusalem returned to Christian control, but not through the kind of crusade many had imagined. And it did not last. In 1244, Khwarezmian forces sacked Jerusalem. The city was lost again to the Crusaders. The following defeat of Crusader and allied forces at La Fourby broke much of the remaining military strength in the region. The pattern repeated. Armies came, plans formed. Egypt was targeted. Louis IX of France led a crusade that captured Damietta in 1249, then collapsed in disaster at Mansoura. Louis himself was captured and ransomed. Years later, he would crusade again, this time to Tunis, where he died in 1270. By then, the world had changed. The Mongols had shaken the Islamic world. New powers rose from the ruins. In Egypt and Syria, the Mamluks became the decisive force. They were military elites who built a disciplined state capable of crushing remaining Crusader positions one by one. The Crusader states no longer looked like a kingdom built around Jerusalem. They looked like a chain of coastal cities waiting for the next siege. By the late 13th century, Acre was the heart of what remained. It was crowded, wealthy, tense, and divided. Merchants from Italian cities argued over privileges. Military orders guarded their compounds. Pilgrims still arrived. Refugees stayed because there was nowhere better to go. The sea kept Acre alive, but the sea also made it feel temporary. Mamluk sultans had already reduced Crusader power across the coast. Baybars captured key fortresses and cities, pressing the Latin presence back toward the water. His successors continued the work. Truces were made and broken. Raids and local violence gave rulers reasons to resume war. In 1291, Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil moved against Acre. The siege brought overwhelming force. Mamluk armies surrounded the city. Siege engines battered the walls. Defenders fought hard, including Templars, Hospitallers, Teutonic Knights. Local fighters, sailors, and civilians pulled into the emergency. But Acre was not the beginning of a new crusade. It was the end of a long retreat. I was there as a harbor worker. By then, I had learned how endings sound. They do not always sound like trumpets. Sometimes they sound like wood cracking under too much weight, like mothers calling names into smoke, like sailors cutting ropes before everyone is aboard. As the walls failed, panic moved toward the harbor. Those with money, strength, or luck tried to reach ships. Others remained behind. The fighting continued street by street. The Templar fortress held out for a time after much of the city had fallen, but it too collapsed. Acre fell in May 1291. The remaining mainland Crusader holdings in the Levant were abandoned or captured soon after. The great experiment that began with the capture of Jerusalem in 1099 had ended on the coast, in fire, crowding, and flight. The crusading idea did not vanish. It would continue in other forms, other regions, other campaigns, other language. But major mainland Crusader rule in the Levant was finished. 2 centuries of prayers, taxes, vows, ships, sermons, sieges, treaties, massacres, ransoms, and graves had come to this. People pushing toward the water, while the city burned behind them. The sea fades, the smoke thins, the old face returns. That is what people forget. Armies arrive with banners, rulers stamp coins, preachers promise certainty, chroniclers write victory into the shape they need. But the city remains after them, carrying more memory than any one people can hold. I have seen men die believing they had settled Jerusalem forever. None of them did. The wars for Jerusalem did not end because men stopped wanting the city. They ended because the world that had made the Crusader states possible had finally run out of walls, ships, money, and time. By 1291, the dream was still alive. The road to it was not. The castles were gone or isolated. The ports could no longer save them. The reinforcements came too late, or not at all. The kingdoms of the coast had become memories before the last ships even left Acre. And still, men kept speaking of return. That is what I remember most. Not that history ends, that people keep believing it will. If you want the next chapter, follow me to witness the other stories within this channel. From riding with Genghis Khan during the Mongol conquests to standing in Paris as the French Revolution turns against its own people. Tell me which story you want to witness next. As always, I will see you in the past.